It was one of those mornings when luxury feels heavy, the kind where silence itself is expensive and even the sound of footsteps is measured. In a marble-floored mansion overlooking the Riviera, a billionaire prepared for another day of meetings, phone calls, and power. Everything in his world moved according to his will. Doors opened before he reached them. Coffee appeared the moment he sat down, and every person who crossed his path lowered their eyes. To him, control wasn't a privilege. It was his nature. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, do you believe money can buy everything, even respect? Type power if you think it can, or respect if you're on the side that believes some things can never be bought. I want to hear your honest opinion, but that morning someone disrupted that order. Her name was Elise, the new maid, young, quiet and graceful in the way she moved, almost invisible. She had only been in the house for a week, and the other servants already whispered about her. They said she spoke several languages but never used them, that she carried herself more like a teacher than a servant. The billionaire hadn't noticed her until today, until she accidentally interrupted a conversation that wasn't meant for her. He was pacing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in English and broken Italian. When Elise entered to serve breakfast, he snapped his fingers. Not now. Just stay silent and wait outside. She froze for a moment, not from fear, but from disbelief. The tone he used was the same tone you use to silence a dog, but she lowered her gaze, nodded politely and stepped back. He hung up, muttering curses in half a dozen languages. When he turned around, Elise was still there, holding a tray of coffee and fruit. "Didn't I tell you to stay quiet?" he said sharply. "You're not here to think, just to serve." The words cut the air like glass. The other staff froze, pretending not to hear. Elise's hands trembled, but she didn't move. Then softly, she said something. Not in English, not in the language of power he was used to, but in flawless, poetic French. "Ce n'est pas le silence qui prouve le respect, monsieur. C'est la manière dont on parle aux autres." The room stopped breathing. He blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. Her accent was pure Parisian, refined, elegant, the kind of French he'd struggled to master for years. Slowly, she raised her eyes. There was no defiance in them, only calm. He asked quietly, "What did you just say?" She repeated, still in French, her tone steady. "Respect isn't proven by silence, sir. It's shown by the way we speak to others." Something in her voice disarmed him. The authority that had filled the room only moments ago vanished. The billionaire who had built empires, negotiated millions and intimidated presidents, suddenly had nothing to say. His confidence, that wall of control, cracked for the first time in years. He looked at her more closely now. Her posture, her words, her pronunciation. This wasn't a simple maid. "Where did you learn French like that?" he asked. Elise smiled faintly. "At the Sorbonne, monsieur. I used to be a professor before." She hesitated, her eyes drifting to the floor. "Before life decided to humble me." He stared at her. A professor. A woman who once taught the language he could barely pronounce correctly. Now working in his home, cleaning his silver and pouring his coffee, something in him twisted. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. He asked, "Why would someone like you work here?" She looked at him with a serenity that made him feel small. Because sometimes life teaches us in silence what pride refuses to hear in words. The room stayed still. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. For the rest of the morning, he couldn't focus. Her words echoed in his head like a mirror shattering the illusion of control. The empire he built had taught him to buy everything, but not dignity. Later that evening, during a dinner with investors, one of them mocked the servants in front of everyone. The billionaire, usually the first to laugh, stayed quiet. when the man snapped at Elise, saying, "She's just help, she doesn't understand." The billionaire interrupted. "She understands more than you think," he said firmly, "and she speaks better French than any of us in this room." The silence that followed was thick. Elise bowed slightly, her expression calm. For the first time, the billionaire saw the reflection of himself, not in wealth, but in humility. After the guests left, he found her cleaning the dining room. "Elise," he said, "I owe you an apology." She shook her head gently. "No, monsieur. What you owe is to yourself. To remember that the way we treat others defines who we truly are." He smiled faintly, a man unaccustomed to being corrected yet strangely grateful for it. "Would you allow me to make it right?" She paused, curious. He gestured toward the piano in the corner. "Play something, in French, perhaps. I think this room needs a different kind of silence." Elise hesitated, then sat at the piano. Her fingers moved gracefully, filling the air with a soft melody. The billionaire stood nearby, listening, not as a man in power, but as a man learning to be human again. When she finished, he bowed slightly, an unspoken gesture of respect. "Merci, Elise," he said quietly, "for teaching me what no fortune ever could." She smiled, not out of victory, but peace. "De rien, monsieur." Life has a way of translating lessons we refuse to learn. The rain began to fall outside, softly tapping against the tall windows. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel cold. And from that day on, whenever someone entered his house, he no longer demanded silence. He listened, because sometimes a single voice, calm, humble, fluent in truth, is enough to change the language of an entire life.